Let's learn how to make a VS Code snippet. Do you watch YouTube web dev tutorials? Of course you do. You're watching one right now. If you like to follow along typing the code in, you can save yourself some typing and get really, really fast by creating your own common snippets for things that you type over and over and over, or your favorite YouTube instructor types over and over. So all of those tutorials use a reset and some sort of centering code. So let's learn how to put those into our VS Code snippets files so we can just hit a couple characters to type many lines of code. If you've watched any YouTube tutorials on web dev, you've seen Emmet shortcuts like if I'm in an HTML file, Emmet recognizes that I'm in an HTML file. So when I type something like an exclamation point and hit tab, I get all of the necessary HTML code to create an HTML document. And I can tab around there and I can do things like, well, maybe I need to link to my style sheet. And I've got Emmet abbreviations for things like links. So if I hit tab there, it gives me my relationship attribute, so I don't have to type that. And it puts my cursor right inside the href attribute so I can type styles.css. Maybe that's even too much typing for you, so you can create your own snippet if you use the same style name every time, right? Especially if you do SCSS or that kind of stuff. So how do we make our own snippets? Well, you go to Code, Preferences, User Snippets, and you'll notice all of the different languages have snippet files. Now, doing this will create a snippets file in your application support folder deep in the bowels of your operating system, whatever it might be. So before I do that, you can also go to your extensions marketplace and search for snippets. And you'll see snippets for all of your favorite platforms and languages. Of course, React, Vue, and Angular, but things like Bootstrap and Tailwind, WordPress, whatever you might be working with. But you might want to create your own. So that's really simple. Again, Code, Preferences, User Snippets, and I'm going to choose the CSS JSON. Now, there's some curly brackets and a commented out piece of documentation that also contains a block of code. So I'm going to copy that block of code, and I'm going to make sure I'm inside my main curly brackets here. And if I paste that in and select the block that I just pasted and hit Command / and that's Control if you guys are on a PC, I get the block of code without comments. This first line is the title of the snippet. So let's create a basic reset. The prefix is the characters that you're going to type to make that shortcut. So I'm going to call this reset. And in the body, you notice there's some $ things. Those are tab stops, or basically variables. So when you make a shortcut, you can have your cursor plop right where you need it for a value, a property, a variable, whatever kind of code you're working with. So I don't need the second line here because I'm just going to use one line. I'm going to go inside my quotes here and I'm going to type out a basic reset. And of course I'm in JSON here, so there's no autocompletes or any of that. So if I do have to do this once in my life to type out the margin and the padding, not sure why I capitalized that, and why not throw in a box sizing as well. If you guys don't know what this stuff does, it makes sure it gets rid of any spacing that might be different from browser to browser. It also gets rid of the little white edge in your browser if you're doing these YouTube tutorials where that fancy CSS UI trick is going to be in the middle of the screen. And box sizing, of course, removes or makes sure the browser doesn't add padding to the width. If you don't know what that means, look it up. Anyway, there's my reset. I'm going to save this CSS JSON file, and just to demonstrate it, I'm going to hop back to my styles.css file, and I can start typing the word reset. It'll show up right in my little suggestion dialog box, and I can just hit tab right there, and boom, there's my snippet. And you'll say, wait a minute, why is that on one line? That's pretty ugly. I want my stuff to format. Just use whatever auto formatter that you like. I'm using Prettier here. All I need to do is save this file, and my indentation and spacing comes out right. All I would suggest is when you're creating these, make sure you put these spaces here between the colon and your value. For some reason, the spacing here doesn't matter to Prettier, but it does matter in between here. You won't get the line breaks that you want. Now, here's another example of where you might want to kind of format your stuff a little bit. So I'm going to put a comma here and do a little space. I'm just going to paste this in because this is a pain in the ass to type. Now, what kind of code is a pain in the ass to type? Well, if you're talking CSS, things like box shadows that have all those values you got to put in there, your offsets and your blurs and all of that stuff. So I'm just going to paste this in here, and what I've created here is a smooth 5-layer shadow, and the prefix that I've created for this is going to be called shadow smooth. And you'll notice that I've got these /R's in there. Those are returns, and I'm going to save this, and I'm going to demonstrate what this is going to look like. I'm going to hop back to my styles, and let's say I'm going to create some sort of element on my page that needs a nice smooth shadow. All I have to type is the beginning of that snippet code there, and it shows up in that dialog box, and I can return or tab, and you see what it does. It adds all of those, and I can quickly go in there and change all of those, and I've just saved myself quite a bit of time because those are a pain in the ass to type. So I'll save that, and you see what Prettier does. It takes the first line and puts it up there. That doesn't bother me so much. What else is hard to type or things you're going to use every time? Well, every one of those YouTube videos uses the Poppins font. So you go to fonts.google and find the Poppins font, and you find the import code for that particular style sheet that's going to add that. Well, let me just hop back over to my CSS JSON file. I'm going to make sure I have a comma after my last curly bracket, and I'll go paste some code in there to save us all some time. And I've created the title, Poppins font import. I've created a prefix with an @ before it to make it easy to type that in. Impop is just what I made up. And I've copied that line that imports Google's CSS file that imports the Poppins font. And I've added every single weight there that it has. That's probably not a good idea. And the description is Poppins font import. But if you have all of the weights there, what I can do is I go back to my style sheet, and the import should be the first thing in your style sheets, by the way. And I'll hit @im, and there it is. I can use my arrow keys to go to the second in my suggestions and hit that, and there we go. And maybe I don't need those weights. The 200 is awfully thin. I'll get rid of that. And I don't need the 900. That's awfully bold, and I'll save that, and then I've got my font. All right. So other things you might do here, every one of the YouTube tutorials uses some sort of centering scheme. Let me just paste that in there as well. Again, making sure that there's a comma after the last snippet I created. I'm just going to paste in this code here, and I've called this body centering. I'm going to use a prefix of grid center because I'm going to use display grid to center things in the body. So this is something that I would probably specifically add to the body tag. So I'll save this, hop over to my styles, and make myself a body selector, and then say, what's that called? It's called grid center. And there it is in my abbreviations, and boom, there we go. I've got, after I save that, I can see I've got all those lines that I don't need to type because I use that every single time I want to center something in the body. Pretty simple. Something to note here, this is a JSON, this is a css.json file. These will not work if you go and create a styles.scss file. You've got to create a JSON SCSS file. The other thing you can do, though, is you can go to Code, Preferences, User Snippets, and in there's a new global snippets file. All right, and I'll just gonna call this styles global so I know what it is. And notice I didn't put an extension on there because the extension is going to be code-snippets for VS Code to recognize that file. And the description here, all of the instructions are just a little bit different. It's going to say place your global snippets here. And the only difference between what I've just demonstrated before is there's a scope attribute here where in this case that would be JavaScript. If I want my file to be, let's do one here. Let's say I just go to my basic reset here. I'll copy that, go back to my global snippets and paste that code in here. And I want to add this scope line. And I want my scope to say CSS and SCSS. Any file with either one of those extensions will let me use this shortcut. There's also a way to do project-based snippets. So if you pass your project files around to your coworkers, they can get the same snippets. Very helpful if you're repeating blocks of code, which of course no developer does, right? No developer copies. Nobody retypes the same thing over and over, do they? Of course not. All right, so that's snippets. That's pretty simple. You can find these snippet files deep in the bowels of your operating system in your application support folder for VS Code and create them there. It's just nice and simple to create them right here from that preferences menu whenever you need to. That's it.